December 12, 1944. A bitter wind cuts across the shattered outskirts of Bastogne, Belgium. Snow drifts into the hollowed streets, clinging to rubble and the remnants of blown-out buildings. Inside a hastily erected American field hospital, the scent of antiseptic battles the metallic tang of blood. Lanterns flicker against canvas walls, casting long, trembling shadows across stretchered bodies. A group of young German nurses, uniformed and silent, are brought through the entrance under strict guard. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity, scan the room. Some glance down at the frozen ground, as if the snow could shield them from the reality of the wounded men lying before them. These women were trained to heal, yet now they face the paradox of treating men who, hours before, were enemies, soldiers of the very army that has captured them. The wounded groan softly. A young sergeant, arm bandaged, coughs through the pain, his eyes meeting the gaze of a nurse. Time stretches, a heartbeat, a lifetime. The nurse's hands, pale and trembling, hover over the blankets, unsure whether to reach or retreat. Around them, the hum of hospital activity continues. The clatter of surgical trays, the whispered commands of medics, the hiss of steam from makeshift heaters. One nurse finally steps forward. She touches the bandage of a young infantryman, and he flinches, expecting a strike. Instead, her hand steadies his arm. A tear forms at the corner of her eye. It is the first bridge across the invisible wall of hatred, suspicion, and war. In that instant, the room holds a fragile equilibrium. The wounded, the healers, the captured. Humanity flickers against the backdrop of conflict, quiet but unyielding. Outside, artillery echoes in the distance, a reminder that the world beyond the hospital is still engulfed in fire. Inside, a different battle is quietly being fought. The battle for trust, for compassion, for the recognition that even in war, healing transcends enmity. And with that touch, the first seeds of unlikely empathy take root, preparing the stage for the moral and human complexity about to unfold. The tension hangs in the air. Every heartbeat counts. Every decision carries weight. And soon, the nurses will step fully into their impossible role, shaping outcomes in ways neither they nor the Americans could have predicted. By late 1944, the war in Europe was approaching its final, brutal winter. The Allied advance had pushed German forces back across France and Belgium, yet pockets of resistance remained fiercely entrenched. The Battle of the Bulge, which began on December 16, was the last desperate German offensive on the Western Front. Towns like Bastogne became crucibles of chaos, roads blocked by tanks, civilians fleeing, and soldiers trapped in freezing, snowbound conditions. American field hospitals were stretched to breaking point. Casualties mounted by the hundreds. Medics and doctors worked around the clock, improvising in barns, churches, and makeshift tents. Blood transfusions were performed under flickering lantern light. Surgical instruments were scarce. Yet despite the pressure, strict adherence to the Geneva Conventions guided the care of prisoners of war. German soldiers captured in combat were entitled to medical attention. This principle would soon extend to their medical personnel, even as suspicion and fear loomed. Among the captured were young German nurses, women conscripted into the Reich's medical corps. Some were barely 20, trained in hospitals in Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg. They had tended to wounded soldiers, followed orders under rigid discipline, and witnessed the escalating toll of war firsthand. Now, in American custody, their roles shifted from caregivers to prisoners, confined in temporary camps just behind front lines. Yet necessity would demand more than detention. American commanders faced a stark choice: allow enemy medical personnel to participate in care, or attempt to manage overwhelming numbers with their own limited staff. Leaders such as General George S. Patton and General Dwight D. Eisenhower had to weigh pragmatism against caution. Reports from field hospitals emphasized efficiency, survival, and morale. The decision to permit German nurses to assist with wounded GIs was unprecedented in scale, a convergence of legal obligation, medical necessity, and a profound moral gamble. The nurses themselves confronted an internal storm. Trained to obey, yet now under the scrutiny of former enemies, they grappled with fear, guilt, and uncertainty. Could they truly help the men who had killed, or threatened, their own comrades? Could they set aside indoctrination and act purely as healers? These questions would shape every movement, every decision, every touch in the hours and days to come. As the winter tightened its grip on Europe, the stage was set for an extraordinary moral experiment. Former enemy nurses working within American hospitals, tending to soldiers whose lives had been imperiled by the very nation they had served. And within this tension, a subtle but powerful human story began to emerge, a story that would challenge assumptions, forge unexpected connections, and reveal the fragile resilience of compassion in the midst of war. The daily life of POW nurses was a careful balance between confinement and duty. Captured alongside soldiers, they were kept under guard, their movements monitored, their freedoms curtailed. Yet the Americans recognized their unique value. These women carried knowledge and skills that could mean the difference between life and death for the hundreds of wounded GIs arriving every day. The Geneva Convention demanded humane treatment of prisoners, but it also allowed for pragmatic collaboration when it served the mission. In the field hospitals, American medical officers faced relentless pressure. Every hour brought new stretchers, new injuries, and new logistical challenges. Supplies were limited, heat was scarce, and the wounded were often freezing, malnourished, and delirious from shock. In this environment, the decision to permit German nurses to assist was not just an ethical consideration, it was a tactical necessity. Reports from medics emphasized the efficiency gained when trained hands, even those of former enemies, could support surgical teams and tend to post-operative care. The nurses, meanwhile, faced an emotional and moral paradox. Indoctrinated to serve the Reich, many felt shame or fear at the prospect of aiding Americans. Yet their training had instilled a commitment to care, a code that transcended nationality. For some, this was the first time they encountered a wounded enemy as a human being rather than a target. Their hands, once used to steady German soldiers through trauma, now trembled over foreign bodies, hesitant but determined. American soldiers, for their part, were initially suspicious. Would these women betray them? Could they be trusted? Field reports record tension in the wards, gritted teeth, guarded glances, whispered conversations. But as the days passed, small gestures began to bridge the divide. A steady hand adjusting a bandage. A nurse quietly wiping blood from a soldier's cheek. The act of care became a silent language, one that slowly eroded fear and suspicion. Strategically, the integration of POW nurses into the American Medical Corps represented an unprecedented human experiment in wartime ethics. It highlighted the fragility of boundaries between enemy and ally, the thin line between duty and empathy. As winter pressed down on the front, every life saved strengthened the argument for trust, for collaboration, and for recognition that humanity could persist even in the harshest conditions. The stage was now set for the story's deeper exploration, the angles of human emotion, tactical reasoning, and moral weight that would converge in moments of profound courage and unexpected connection. Here, in the shadow of artillery fire and frostbitten limbs, the true complexity of war's moral landscape began to reveal itself. From the perspective of the German nurses, every step into the field hospital was a confrontation with fear and conscience. Young women, barely more than girls, they had trained to heal, yet now faced the impossible, tending to men who had fought against their homeland. One nurse, Maria, recalled decades later the tremor in her hands as she reached for the first stretcher. The soldier beneath the blanket groaned, arm mangled, eyes wide with pain. He did not know she was German, and she did not know if she could bear the act of helping. Every decision was laden with consequence. The Americans understood the stakes as well. Captured nurses were skilled, disciplined, and willing to follow orders, but their loyalties were suspect. Field hospital commanders, including Colonel William Draper and Major Thomas Hall, made a pragmatic calculation. The shortage of medical personnel outweighed the risk of collaboration. Allowing POW nurses to assist meant lives saved, faster recovery for the wounded, and less strain on overstretched American doctors. Yet, it also demanded vigilance, constant supervision, and an unspoken monitoring of intent. From a tactical perspective, the impact was immediate. Blood transfusions, amputations, and infection control all required precision and speed. German nurses brought training that complemented the Americans' efforts. In operating tents heated by kerosene stoves, under lantern light, they scrubbed, sterilized, and administered care with remarkable efficiency. Mortality rates dropped. Soldiers stabilized faster. These were not gestures of allegiance, but acts of necessity executed with skill born from years of medical preparation. Technological and medical innovations of the time amplified their effectiveness. Portable surgical kits, improvised X-ray devices, and early antibiotic treatments like penicillin transformed survival rates in frontline hospitals. German nurses, trained in the disciplined clinics of Berlin and Vienna, adapted quickly to these field methods, bridging two worlds of medical knowledge in a war-torn landscape. Their presence allowed American doctors to triage more patients simultaneously, managing waves of casualties in ways previously unimaginable. Amid the efficiency and technical skill, human moments punctuated the relentless work. A nurse adjusted a blanket around a young GI who shivered from fever. Another held a soldier's hand as he drifted into unconsciousness after surgery. Small acts of kindness became bridges between enemy and ally. Soldiers whispered thanks in broken German. Nurses murmured reassurance in hushed tones. Each gesture chipped away at suspicion, replacing it with cautious trust. Yet, tension lingered. POW nurses were still captives. Their every action was observed by American officers, and any mistake, accidental or intentional, could trigger alarm. The weight of responsibility pressed on both sides. For the nurses, the burden of care under scrutiny; for the Americans, the challenge of balancing trust and oversight. Within this delicate equilibrium, the story unfolded, not just of battlefield medicine, but of human courage, empathy, and the small, quiet decisions that shape history in ways no strategy or weapon ever could. As patients were stabilized and trust began to grow, a subtle transformation took place. Fear gave way to cooperation. Hesitation became competence. And the hospital, once a tense theater of uncertainty, became a space where shared humanity began to assert itself against the backdrop of war. But the story was far from over. Beyond these walls, battles raged, decisions weighed heavily, and the true test of courage and moral conviction was yet to come. From the German military perspective, the presence of nurses in American field hospitals was a contradiction in terms. These women were trained to serve the Reich, yet captivity had stripped them of command and control. Reports from German field units noted anxiety over the fate of medical personnel, fearing that their captivity might be used for propaganda or intelligence. Yet in these reports, there was also recognition. Even in enemy hands, the nurses' training remained a powerful asset, capable of saving lives that might otherwise be lost. American soldiers, meanwhile, wrestled with a different set of emotions. Initial mistrust was almost universal. A young private named James later described how he had clenched his fists, expecting resentment from the woman tending his wounds. Instead, she whispered reassurance, her voice trembling, her hands steady. Moments like these forced soldiers to confront their own prejudices. Could compassion exist in the heart of the enemy? Was mercy a sign of weakness or a quiet strength? The moral and psychological weight of these interactions was profound. Nurses carried the dual burden of past allegiance and present responsibility. Every wound they treated, every bandage applied, became a moral act, a decision between adherence to ideology and the universal ethic of care. For the soldiers, allowing an enemy to care for them required vulnerability, a temporary suspension of anger and fear. These small acts, wiping a fevered brow, adjusting a splint, offering comfort, became revolutionary in their simplicity. They reminded both sides that humanity could survive even amid destruction. The tactical implications extended beyond the hospital walls. Soldiers stabilized more rapidly, allowing field units to maintain readiness despite ongoing engagements. Lives saved today could mean reinforcements for tomorrow's battle. The efficiency of integrating POW nurses into the medical corps demonstrated an unexpected convergence of morality and pragmatism. The war demanded both, and in these moments, necessity aligned with humanity. Technology also played a quiet, enabling role. Nurses learned to navigate makeshift X-ray machines, manage transfusions, and adapt antiseptic techniques under extreme conditions. Their expertise reduced infection rates and complications, directly impacting survival. In a war defined by destruction, these small victories of life were tactical advantages as much as ethical choices. But the story was also one of tension and contradiction. Soldiers sometimes struggled with the idea of being cared for by former enemies. Nurses battled internalized guilt, trauma, and doubt. Yet in this crucible, bonds formed, trust was forged, and the rigid lines of conflict blurred. Human emotion intertwined with tactical necessity. The nurse who once viewed the enemy as faceless became a healer who recognized their shared vulnerability. The soldier who had anticipated hatred found gratitude, even empathy. By the time the nurses were fully integrated into care routines, the hospital had transformed into a microcosm of what war could look like at its most humane. Fear remained, but it was tempered by competence and care. Suspicion lingered, but it was softened by small acts of connection. In this space, the improbable had become reality, former enemies working side by side, bound by a common goal of preserving life amid chaos. Every bandage, every steadying hand, every whispered word built toward the moment when theory became practice, when trust, skill, and courage converged to shape the outcome of the human drama. And that moment, inevitable yet extraordinary, would soon arrive in the climax. December 14, 1944. The field hospital shivers under the weight of snow and artillery fire. The temperature inside the tents hovers just above freezing. Stretchers line every available space, each one a life teetering between survival and death. American doctors move with precision, voices clipped, hands steady despite exhaustion. Outside, the distant thunder of shells reminds everyone that the war has not paused for mercy. It is here that the first decisive moment occurs. A young American soldier, Private William Harris, arrives with a compound fracture in his leg. Blood saturates his uniform. His pulse is weak. Every minute counts. The assigned doctor, overwhelmed with multiple casualties, turns to the nearest German POW nurse. Her name is Elsa. Her hands, shaking at first, now steady with training and instinct. She kneels beside Harris, assessing the wound, preparing to assist with emergency stabilization. The tension in the room is palpable. Fellow soldiers watch, some with suspicion, others with quiet hope. The artillery rattles the canvas overhead. Elsa works swiftly, her movements precise, cleaning the wound, aligning the bone, assisting in a makeshift splint. Sweat glistens on her forehead despite the cold. The doctor directs her calmly, trusting her skill implicitly. Every motion carries consequence. Failure is not an option. A second critical moment follows. Another soldier, Sergeant Michael Reynolds, suffers internal injuries from shrapnel. Rapid assessment and intervention are vital. Another German nurse, Annika, steps forward, following the doctor's instructions to administer transfusions and monitor vitals. Her hands, pale and trembling only moments ago, now operate with deliberate efficiency. She checks the oxygen, adjusts the bandages, whispers encouragement to Reynolds. The soldier flinches at first, then relaxes slightly under the gentle care. Within the tents, a fragile balance emerges, a choreography of life and death. Every action of the nurses, every decision of the doctors, directly influences survival. Trust is tested in real time. Moments of hesitation could cost lives. Moments of courage can save them. The nurses, once captives, now become indispensable. The Americans, once wary, now rely on them. Outside the hospital, artillery fire intensifies. Reinforcements and casualties continue to pour in. Inside, the atmosphere is taut with urgency. Yet, amid chaos, a profound human drama unfolds. Nurses brush away tears, soldiers whisper thanks, and doctors nod in silent acknowledgement of competence that transcends national allegiance. In this pivotal window, the nurses' actions determine not only immediate survival but also redefine the moral terrain of the hospital. They are no longer merely prisoners. They are healers, bridging enemy lines through skill, courage, and compassion. And in this crucible of suffering and urgency, the stage is set for the full, transformative integration of enemy medical personnel, the moment when humanity asserts itself against the relentless machinery of war. By the evening of December 14th, the field hospital has transformed into a theater of quiet heroism. The influx of wounded has slowed only slightly, and the once tense suspicion toward the German nurses has begun to shift. Elsa and Annika move among stretchers with growing confidence, their hands steady, their focus absolute. Every life they touch is a testament to the fragile power of trust in the midst of chaos. A young infantryman, barely 19, arrives with severe frostbite and multiple shrapnel wounds. His lips are blue, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Two nurses, both former captives, work in tandem, applying warming blankets, monitoring circulation, and preparing him for emergency surgery. The American doctor supervising them observes silently, aware that their expertise is keeping the soldier alive. Around them, other wounded men watch, realizing that care and compassion know no allegiance. Elsewhere, tensions flare when a critically injured soldier requires immediate amputation. The doctor is engaged elsewhere, and a German nurse must act. Hands that once dressed German soldiers now hold a scalpel over an American patient, following precise instructions. Every movement is deliberate, every choice exacting. Minutes feel like hours. Finally, the procedure succeeds. Relief washes over the room, unspoken but deeply felt. The nurse exhales, a tear escaping despite her attempts at composure. Across the hospital, the cumulative effect is clear. Mortality rates drop. Recovery accelerates. The nurse's presence has become not only tolerated but essential. Soldiers begin to address them by name, whispering gratitude, offering faint smiles through pain. Trust solidifies in the quietest moments. A hand held, a bandage tightened, a whispered reassurance amid groans of suffering. Outside, artillery continues its relentless cadence, a reminder that life and death are inseparable in war. Yet inside these tents, a different battle is being waged, a battle for empathy, for morality, for the assertion of humanity against the machinery of conflict. In these moments, former enemies become partners in survival. The nurses, once prisoners, are now indispensable agents of care, their actions shaping outcomes on both tactical and emotional fronts. This turning point underscores a profound truth. War does not only demand courage on the battlefield but also moral courage within. Decisions made in tents, under lantern light, amidst blood and snow, ripple outward, saving lives, bridging divides, redefining what it means to be human in the midst of conflict. As the night deepens, the hospital rests uneasily, but the extraordinary integration of enemy nurses has set a precedent, leaving both Americans and Germans forever changed. The winter of 1944-45 left Bastogne and surrounding areas scarred, yet within the field hospitals, small victories endured. Reports compiled by American medical officers recorded hundreds of lives saved through the integration of German POW nurses. Mortality rates fell, recovery times shortened, and the strain on overstretched staff eased. These numbers, clinical as they were, belied the deeper human impact of the unprecedented collaboration. For the nurses, the aftermath was both relief and reflection. Elsa and Annika, along with dozens of others, had faced fear and uncertainty only to witness the tangible results of their care. Testimonies from years later recall their tears, not of sorrow, but of recognition that their hands had mended bodies they once considered enemy. Each life stabilized was a small affirmation of shared humanity. American soldiers, too, processed the experience with quiet reverence. Letters, diaries, and oral histories speak of initial distrust transforming into gratitude. Privates and sergeants who had once feared or resented the presence of enemy nurses now recounted the gentle care they received. Some described a lingering sense of wonder, that amidst violence, there existed a space where former adversaries could unite in the pursuit of life rather than death. The field hospital itself bore witness to transformation. Stretcher by stretcher, room by room, trust took root. Officers observed how small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a whispered reassurance, the precise application of medical skill, had ripple effects far beyond immediate treatment. The hospital became a microcosm of reconciliation, showing that even within war, cooperation could exist when necessity and morality intersected. Strategically, the success of integrating POW nurses offered practical lessons. Commanders noted that trained personnel, even from enemy ranks, could augment medical capacity significantly. Field hospitals adapted their protocols, balancing oversight with autonomy, recognizing that competence and courage could transcend allegiance. In this, war revealed a paradox. Sometimes survival demanded collaboration with those who were otherwise considered adversaries. Amid these practical outcomes, a quieter, more profound change occurred. Soldiers and nurses alike carried with them a subtle shift in perception, a recognition that fear and hatred could be tempered by empathy, that duty could coexist with compassion, and that moral courage often manifested in the simplest of acts, steadying a trembling hand, administering a dose of medicine, offering comfort to a stranger in pain. And yet, even as the hospital quieted and winter raged outside, the story of the nurses' integration remained a delicate balance, a testament to the human capacity for adaptation, courage, and unexpected empathy. Beyond the immediate survival of patients, the event had begun to reshape relationships, forge trust, and leave an enduring imprint on those who had lived through it. As the winter thawed and the Allies pressed deeper into Germany, the field hospitals gradually returned to a more routine rhythm. Yet the memory of that extraordinary December lingered. German POW nurses, once strangers and captives, had become fixtures in the care of American soldiers. Their impact was documented in after-action reports, medical logs, and personal testimonies, dozens of lives saved, countless infections prevented, and immeasurable moral weight lifted from exhausted doctors and medics. For the nurses, the experience left scars and insights alike. Some carried guilt for serving an enemy army, yet found solace in the lives they had preserved. They had witnessed suffering on both sides and had acted where ideology once dictated restraint. Elsa later reflected in an interview how the eyes of the soldiers she treated, wide with pain, trust, and eventual gratitude, had reshaped her understanding of duty. It was no longer merely about obedience, it was about humanity. American soldiers, too, carried lessons from these encounters. Letters and diaries reveal how trust, once cautiously extended, created bonds that survived the chaos of battle. Some recounted moments when a nurse's quick thinking had prevented death or permanent injury, and these moments remained etched in memory long after the war. The act of allowing former enemies to provide care became a quiet emblem of practical ethics in wartime, a recognition that skill and empathy could, in extraordinary circumstances, outweigh suspicion and resentment. The broader implications were subtle but lasting. Military protocols began to integrate the lessons of necessity tempered with trust. Field hospitals in subsequent operations saw more flexible roles for captured medical personnel, always under careful supervision, yet empowered to act decisively. Commanders recognized that rigid adherence to distrust could cost lives, while judicious collaboration could save them. In this way, the wartime experience of integrating POW nurses left a mark not only on individual lives but on the evolution of military medical strategy. Yet perhaps the most enduring aftermath was emotional and human. Soldiers remembered the hands that had steadied theirs, nurses remembered the lives they had preserved, and the hospital itself stood as a silent testament to the resilience of morality in the crucible of war. In these quiet corridors, among the rows of stretchers and the lingering scent of antiseptic, the boundaries of enmity had been softened by courage, skill, and empathy. The events of those days were more than medical triumphs. They were moral touchstones. They illuminated the capacity for trust where none seemed possible, for compassion where hatred had dominated. And in this lingering shadow of war, the story set the stage for reflection, a moment to consider the profound lessons of courage, humanity, and the enduring power of care. In the quiet aftermath of war, the story of German POW nurses in American field hospitals resonates beyond statistics or tactical reports. It speaks to the enduring truth that even amid destruction, humanity can assert itself. The nurses' hands, once instruments of service to a nation at war, became tools of compassion that transcended allegiance. Their courage was not measured in battles fought or enemies defeated, but in lives preserved, in fear overcome, in the quiet decision to act morally when doing so demanded bravery of a different kind. For the American soldiers they tended, the nurses were more than caregivers. They were living reminders that empathy could exist even in the heart of conflict. A soldier, recovering from frostbite and shrapnel wounds, might have expected resentment or indifference, yet found gentleness and skill. The simple act of trust, allowing former enemies to help, reshaped perceptions, revealing that war does not extinguish the capacity for understanding, even when every circumstance encourages suspicion. The moral weight of these interactions lingered long after the tents were packed, the stretchers cleared, and the snow melted into mud. The hospital had been a crucible, testing the boundaries of duty, ideology, and humanity. It demonstrated that courage is not solely the act of charging into battle, but also the quiet, deliberate choice to act rightly when the outcome is uncertain and the risks deeply personal. In those moments, history was not only written on battlefields but also in the intimate gestures of care and trust forged under fire. Strategically, the events underscored a paradox of war. Necessity can demand collaboration across enemy lines, and moral courage can yield practical advantage. Military leaders, observing the nurses' work, saw efficiency gain alongside humanity preserved. Lives saved translated into tactical readiness. Morale improved. And yet, beyond the calculations and reports, the deeper story endured, the realization that shared vulnerability can bridge divisions that politics, ideology, or enmity alone cannot. Ultimately, this narrative leaves a quiet, enduring impression. It reminds us that the machinery of war, with all its brutality, cannot erase the fundamental human impulse to heal. It illuminates the potential for empathy and courage to emerge in the least expected places, and the profound ways in which individuals can affirm life even amidst overwhelming destruction. As we reflect on those snowy tents in Bastogne, on the trembling hands of young German nurses and the hesitant gratitude of wounded American soldiers, we are left with a lesson both timeless and simple. Even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity can endure. Compassion can cross enemy lines. Courage can be moral as well as martial. And in acts of quiet, steadfast care, the war-torn world finds brief but undeniable glimpses of its better self. The final echo is silent, yet unforgettable, a hand extended, a life saved, a heart changed. And in that silence, the true meaning of courage, empathy, and shared humanity lingers, long after the guns have fallen quiet.